The Ukrainian struggle against the Russian occupation continues. Taking advantage of their numerical superiority, the Russians are attempting to storm Ukrainian positions with heavy artillery and infantry every day. The Ukrainian military, which has fewer human resources and weapons, is forced to defend its positions using smarter and more effective methods of destroying the occupiers. In this video, I will show you real battles where Ukrainians destroy Russian occupiers, which were filmed. I'm Hustler, let's get started. This is a Russian T-90 tank. The tank's crew does not yet know that it is being hunted by Ukrainian drones. One Ukrainian drone hits the tank right under the turret, but it does not destroy it. A few seconds later, another Ukrainian drone strikes the tank's armour, jamming the turret and causing it to spin incessantly. After a while, the tank stops completely and receives the last, third drone strike, which eventually ignites it, and then the tank burns down. Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance detected the movement of Russian troops, waiting for the moment when all the occupiers gathered in one place. A cluster shell from HIMARS was fired, hitting the center of the Russian ambush. The terrified Russians who survived the attack began to evacuate quickly. Then another cluster charge was fired at them. It was supposed to be a large-scale Russian artillery offensive against Ukrainian positions in southern Ukraine, but the Russian invaders encountered strong resistance from the defenders and suffered heavy losses. This is an armored personnel carrier of the Russian infantry. It tried to escape from the Ukrainian kamikaze drone at all speeds, but the drone operator was faster, and after a targeted strike, the armored vehicle was completely destroyed. This one also thought it could outsmart the Ukrainian drone. Another armored vehicle with Russian soldiers, which was intended for an assault. The kamikaze drone managed to damage the transporter, and then a Ukrainian tank arrived and finally finished off the target. And here is an example of the fact that in the Russian army, everyone is for themselves. These two Russian occupiers tried to escape from the battlefield on a motorcycle. One of them was wounded. In order not to burden the motorcycle, the other occupier decided to leave it on the battlefield. This is already the Kurakhiv region. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone destroys an enemy unit with a single hit under the tank's turret. Another destruction of the Russian occupiers. This Russian tank tried to fight against the Ukrainian military, but received a targeted charge from a drone. This is an armored personnel carrier of the Russian military moving across the field, seeing two Ukrainian tanks and a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone flying behind it. But the Russians are not bothered by this at all. They continue to drive close to the Ukrainian tank and keep driving. The Ukrainian tanker waited for the enemy armored personnel carrier to get closer, and then he delivered a precise, almost point-blank, strike. The tank crew managed to survive, but Ukrainian defenders did not finish them off. This Russian convoy tried to take Ukrainian positions with heavy artillery, but encountered Ukrainian resistance and was completely destroyed. Two more Russian tank crews who made a mistake when they went to fight against the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian defenders fired 2 drones that destroyed both tanks. And now you can see the work of Ukrainian artillery destroying Russian tanks. The hit was so accurate that the tank's turret flew off. 2 more Russian tanks were spotted near Ukrainian positions. One of them was successfully destroyed by Ukrainian artillery. Kurakhiv direction. The Russian occupiers are trying to break through the Ukrainian defense in large groups and push the front line even further. As a result, they are met by Ukrainian air defense with drones, which ruthlessly destroys their equipment. The Russian occupiers were not prepared for such strong pressure from Ukrainian drones. The Russian occupiers were successfully defeated before realizing their intentions to seize new territory. And this was the next brigade of Russians who tried to quickly break through the defense of the Ukrainians, who had just destroyed the occupiers' column in the same direction. Most likely, the Russians were thinking of taking the Ukrainians by aggressive assault, hoping that the defenders would not be able to repel many attacks so quickly. But it did not happen. The Russian occupiers were defeated with huge losses. Russians who are trying to seize Ukrainian land should realize that this is a one-way ticket. They will not return to Russia on their own 2 feet. Ukrainians are on their own land. They will ruthlessly destroy anyone who tries to take away their freedom. In the Kurakhiv district, the Russian military gathered courage and decided to storm the positions of the Ukrainian defenders of the 47th Brigade with 1 tank. But on the way to the positions, they were met by a Ukrainian kamikaze drone and turned the tank into a pile of hot metal. Here, Ukrainian scouts noticed a rotation among the Russian military. Without hesitation, the first bomb was dropped on the occupier's vehicle, followed by another, which completely destroyed the vehicle and disarmed its crew. Another enemy target spotted by Ukrainian drone operators was destroyed, and another fireworks display from a tank. Ukrainian intelligence spotted another Russian convoy moving toward Ukrainian positions. Ukrainian artillery delivered a powerful fire strike that destroyed some of the equipment. The remaining tanks that survived the attack were destroyed by shells from unmanned aerial vehicles and kamikaze drones. The the Ukrainian military successfully accomplished their task, having worked professionally on the enemy. And this is the Ukrainian military in the Kursk region under smoke cover clearing landings, with the Russians using an Abrams tank and a Bradley armored anti-tank vehicle. After successful clearing of the site, tanks returned to Ukrainian positions. In the Kharkiv sector, Ukrainian intelligence recorded the redeployment of Russian troops. Taking advantage of this moment, the Ukrainian military began destroying military equipment along with the occupiers. After a targeted strike on the Russians, the occupiers had to hide in a forest belt, but Ukrainian drone operators were able to find them there as well. An unexpected event happened here for the Russian occupiers. They tried to find a Ukrainian drone in the sky and shoot it down. Suddenly, a Ukrainian tank drove up to them and fired an aimed shot. Southern Ukraine's defense forces found a Russian SA-17 Grizzly anti-aircraft missile system in a forest landing. Ukrainian artillerymen accepted the intelligence data and launched an accurate strike with HIMARS. The Russian air defense system was successfully destroyed. And this is the Kursk region, the buffer zone of the Ukrainian military, where they have also taken good positions and are destroying the Russian invaders. Then, the Ukrainian military used Dragon drones to burn out the Russian occupiers and their combat kit. This Russian armored personnel carrier moving towards the Ukrainian military was first hit by a drone, and then the next kamikaze drone completely destroyed it. And then -1 Russian tank and 1 armored personnel carrier that was completely burned. Here, 3 enemy armored personnel carriers tried to storm the Ukrainian infantry in a forest landing. When the Russians got closer, they opened fire from the armored personnel carriers. The Ukrainian military also began to return fire and eventually managed to hit 1 Russian armored vehicle. The invaders tried to take the forest landing with infantry, but after receiving a fierce rebuff, they turned around and began to flee in 2 armored personnel carriers. A Russian tank spotted by a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone hit a mine and completely detonated. This is a Russian truck with ammunition, which will detonate in a few seconds after a Ukrainian drone strike and make a big fireworks display. And this was a column of Russian mercenaries trying to break through the Ukrainian defense sector, but the defenders of Ukraine gave a powerful rebuff and destroyed all the enemies. And another accurate hit on the Russian column. The Russian infantry on the occupied lands of the Ukrainian territory in Zaporizhzhia region decided to conduct training for future snipers, but Ukrainian intelligence is not asleep. All the coordinates were passed on to the artillery, and then a devastating strike was launched with HIMARS cluster bombs. Ukrainian intelligence discovered a $25 million Tor anti-aircraft missile system in the field. After passing the coordinates to the militants, a precision strike was launched, which first damaged the anti-aircraft system, and then it completely burned down. Another Russian self-propelled artillery unit was destroyed by a Ukrainian kamikaze drone. Ukrainian drone operators are constantly working in an aggressive style, destroying enemy attempts to attack Ukrainian territory. And this is Toretsk, Donetsk region. This building was mined by the Ukrainian military. The Russian occupiers, not knowing that there were explosives inside the building, occupied it. After that, the Ukrainian military remotely blew it up together with the occupiers. And another unsuccessful assault by the Russian military that ended in total destruction. The Ukrainian military defeated the occupiers' heavy equipment and disarmed the personnel. Kurakhiv region, a settlement completely destroyed by Russian invaders. Two Russian mercenaries are trying to find a place to rest, but a Ukrainian drone operator has other plans for them. Another Russian armored personnel carrier hit a Ukrainian mine and exploded. Only scrap metal remained of the armored vehicle. This is another attempt by the Russian military to break through the Ukrainian front. The invaders' brigade consisted of 6 pieces of military equipment. The first tank in the convoy was a Russian tank that opened fire on Ukrainian positions. It was also the first to be hit by a Ukrainian javelin. But this time, the hit was weak, and the tank continued to move. The Ukrainian military then loaded another charge and fired a control shot. The tank was neutralized. Then, a Ukrainian tank arrived on the battlefield and destroyed a Russian armored personnel carrier with infantry with a well-aimed shot. The Russian military began to flee, but most of them were neutralized. Thank you, friends. That's all for today. Subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the latest developments. This video was prepared by Hustler. See you soon.